All right, it seems like almost every year, the one variety of dahlia that you decided you wanted to have 5 plants of in your yard, you only end up with 1 tuber. But all is not lost. Today I'm going to show you how you can propagate dahlias from a single tuber and make multiple plants. The first thing you want to do is to plant your tuber in a little pot of dirt and leave the crown exposed. Put it in a sunny window and let it start growing as this one is done. And usually when you get a pair of leaves or 3 sets of leaves, you can now make a cutting of using this sprout. So the first thing you want to do is to make a cut below the last pair of leaves on the stem. And that's just above where the sprout is emerging from the crown. It doesn't matter whether it's an angled cut or a straight cut. What you want to do is just make a cleanest cut as you can. So you're just going to make that cut. Then what you want to do is to remove the 2 lowest sets of leaves, or 1 lower sets of leaves. You can just break them off. And the reason for this is where that leaf was attached to the stem, this little node here will produce a root. And these roots are more likely to produce tubers than roots that come directly off the stem. At this point, it's possible, if you want, to dip the stem in some root hormone. It's not really necessary. If you use the root hormone, be sure to read the directions and be careful with it. You don't want to get it on your hands or inhale it. But you don't really need it. Then what you want to do is take a cup. I like to use old coffee cups, but you can use any cup you want. Fill it with some potting soil. Take a pencil and make a little hole for the stem and stick it in and push it down. And then it's not a bad idea at this point to add a little more water to seal the dirt around that stem. And then what you can do is basically create a little greenhouse by putting a plastic cup over the top. And this can be put under lights, in a warm location, not in the direct sun. If it's in the direct sun, it will burn up the cutting that you have in there. Okay, then once you've made the cutting, it's very easy to simply write the name of the plant on the cup and the date that you made the cutting. And after about a week or 2, it should root. And what you can do to test how well it's rooted is to just leave the cup ajar and notice the plant. If the plant doesn't wilt, it probably has well-developed roots, and eventually you'll be able to remove the cup when it does not wilt when it's exposed to the air like that. But until the roots are very well formed, you can just leave this lid on, and this will turn into a plant which you can then transplant to a larger container. And this plant will produce tubers, it'll produce flowers, and it'll be just as good as a plant that came from the tuber. You're going to get more than one plant out of this. Now, if you look at where we took this cutting here, usually the tubers, there are 4 places at the base of each stem which will now put out 4 more sprouts. And once those sprouts develop, you'll be able to take 4 cuttings from this tuber And that way we're already up to 5, and you can probably take 6 or 7 by the time you're done without damaging the tuber. Once you've taken that many, it's probably not a good idea to reuse the tuber, as it'll probably be somewhat weakened from making all of those sprouts. Here I wanted to show you when making a cutting, if it's necessary to trim the leaves, it will not hurt the formation and the growth of the cutting. So here I'm going to cut this one, and you can see it has a lot of leaves. And so once again, I'm going to remove the lower leaves. But these 2 leaves may not fit very well inside my cup. So what you can do, and what will not hurt it, is to remove those leaves, or even in some cases, if you remove part of the leaf, it will not hurt the cutting. And then this can be put in the pot. And there will be enough room to have the leaves fit inside your little greenhouse. Okay, here's another technique that some people have used, but it does present some additional problems that using a cup and creating your own little individual greenhouse doesn't present. One of the problems that can develop is what's known as damping off. So if you grow seeds, you'll probably have experienced the seedlings coming up, germinating, starting to grow, and then they turn black, usually right at the ground level, and die. And this is caused by a variety of different fungus, and the fungus respond primarily to excessive amounts of moisture. And so it's important not to keep the environment too moist. In this particular tray, you can see there were a lot of cuttings that didn't make it, and probably it got too humid in there because each of these pots has water, and the pots themselves were wet, and the entire tray was sitting on a heat mat, and so the humidity in there was very favorable to the fungus, and it caused many of these cuttings to die. The advantage of this method is once you make the cutting, put it in here and water it, you probably won't need to water this for another week or 2, and it will maintain enough moisture to promote root growth, but not too much so that you have to worry about damping off. In places like Michigan, it's a good idea to plant your tubers in advance rather than planting them in the ground. It gives you a head start on flowering, and usually you can get flowers in July if you start the tubers inside. And a very easy way to do that is to take an old pot that maybe you had a perennial in, and if it's a taller pot, you can cut it off. You don't need it to be that deep. You can then fill it with a good potting soil and take your tuber, and here you can see the developing eye on the tuber, and then it's just a matter of sticking it in a few inches under the ground and then giving it a good dose of water. The other thing you want to do is don't forget to put a label on the pot. This can then be put in a warm, sunny place, and eventually it will start growing, and by the time May comes, end of May, when you normally can plant here in Michigan, you're going to have a nice tall plant that you can put out. And at that point, it's very easy, just like potting a perennial. The whole pot will be filled with roots. You can just lift it out and put it directly in the ground. Some people actually will even put the entire pot in the ground, and that works well too, as long as you have holes in the bottom of the pots. The feeder roots will go out the bottom of the pot, and makes it very easy in the fall. You can just pull the pot out and store the entire pot over the winter and deal with the tubers in the spring. Or if you want you can remove the tubers in the fall and divide them and store them. You may have noticed that when you take your tubers out of storage, sometimes you see these little roots developing on the tip of the tuber. These are called feeder roots, and these are usually the first growth you see on a tuber, which allows the tuber to pick up moisture and will allow the eye to develop into a shoot. These are not the roots that are going to produce next year's tubers. Those will be roots that eventually develop from the base of the sprout that comes up from the crown of the tuber, and those roots will eventually face the tubers. If you decide to plant your tubers in a pot, you may find that the tubers are too large to fit in your pot. All you need to do is cut the tuber, and this will not affect the growth of the plant. And it will not affect the growth of the feeder roots, which will form around the cut portion of the tuber.